This is India. When news broke out that India was planning to fix their infrastructure problem, many people rejoiced. Most people were interested in how the government saw this as a priority and made it an urgent project. For decades, India has suffered from poor infrastructure. Some believe that if this matter is not addressed immediately, there will be heavy traffic on the streets of India, and buildings will probably collapse. The country is undeniably vulnerable to any type of disaster, which has caused some people to be concerned. But will infrastructure development be the answer to India's capacity building needs? You'll have to keep watching until the end to find out. The current state of India's infrastructure has necessitated a new plan that calls for significant increases across the board. Luckily, some supporters see this as an opportunity to create jobs for the country's young labor force. The Indian government recently unveiled a budget that proposed significant increases in spending for highways, roads, railways, and airports, but a smaller increase in spending for rural development and employment. This plan has been met with enthusiasm, as many people see it as an opportunity to improve India's image on a global scale. But before we get too deep into infrastructure development discussions, consider New Delhi, India's capital city. Delhi possesses the infrastructure that can be referred to as a modern city. Major innovations and economic growth in New Delhi has placed the city on the global map, competing with other world-class cities. Delhi's infrastructure has dramatically improved, with flyovers, new roads, bridges, sanitation, healthcare facilities, etc. With several excellent schools and universities to choose from, education has always been a specialty of Delhi. Other major government initiatives include housing, telecom, power facilities, job creation, and transportation. Before the beautiful streets and expanding infrastructure in the state capital, Delhi was just like any other Indian state. However, it has a long history, dating back to India's first transportation construction exercise, with many colonial stories attached to it. When it comes to infrastructure development, Delhi has seen prolonged growth. Even today, a walk down New Delhi streets reveals much about the city's poor infrastructure. Some roads are simply too narrow to accommodate the rapidly growing population. Peak hours are when people rush to get to their various destinations and keep up with their tight schedules. India has been closely related to inadequate infrastructure, so when some of the people heard about their plan to fix this sole problem, people were excited and wanted to see how the government intends to pull that off. The $530 billion project proposed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government for the fiscal year beginning in April 2021 calls for significant infrastructure investment. Still, critics say that it'll do too little to address the country's urgent problems. The major ones are rising unemployment, decreases in household expenditure and spending habits, and growing discontent with economic inequality, which was highlighted since the pandemic. The coronavirus has hampered India's economy, robbing it of the momentum required to provide jobs for its young and rapidly expanding labor force. It's also exacerbated longer-term issues already weighing on growth, such as lack of competitive spirit with other countries, high debt, and policy blunders. The construction industry has become the government of India's primary focus. India intends to spend $1.5 trillion on infrastructure between 2019 and 2023 in order to ensure the country's long-term development. The government has proposed investing Rs. 5 million crore, which is equivalent to US $750 billion in railway infrastructure between 2018 and 2030. India and Japan have joined forces to develop infrastructure in India's northeast states, as well as to establish an India-Japan Coordination Forum for Northeast Development to the initiative strategic infrastructure improvements for the region. The availability of suitable land remains India's single most significant bottleneck to infrastructure development. Delays in acquiring land result in cost overruns, discouraging the private sector from investing in infrastructure projects. In India, compulsory takings or the legal fiat of eminent domain have been common methods of acquiring land. However, in recent years, compulsory land acquisition has come under fire for causing widespread conflict over problems of inadequate compensation and displacement of land losers. Let's look at the right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act 2012, subsequently the Fair Compensation Act 2013. The Fair Compensation Act of 2013 mandated increased compensation for land losers and included provisions for obtaining consent prior to land acquisition. Scholarly assessments of the law, on the other hand, throw into doubt both the method by which the law was established to determine the compensation given to land losers and the grueling processes in accordance with the law for land acquisition. According to Sunil Kumar Sinha, principal economist at India Ratings, a credit rating agency, people's real incomes have been eroding across the board. Income growth is not even keeping pace with the rate of inflation in the economy, he explained. As a result, several middle-class Indians have postponed purchasing large-screen televisions, washing machines, and kitchen appliances, which they used to buy during the festival season. According to experts, demand is also cooling in poorer, rural areas. The government predicted that India's economy would grow by 11% in 2021. The estimate has now been reduced to 9.2%. The forecast for following the year is 8 to 8.5%. These figures follow a 7.3% drop in 2020 that ended in March 2021 when Mr. Modi forced a nationwide lockdown to combat the spread of the coronavirus. As a result, thousands of people lost their jobs and were forced to return to their villages, struggling to make ends meet on meager farm plots. The government has undertaken a vaccination program that helped rekindle some momentum, but economists say Mr. Modi's lack of willingness to spend big has stifled growth. The 2021 budget called for a 35% increase in spending, primarily on infrastructure projects. The government emphasized that focusing on construction would help the economy grow. During the budget presentation in Parliament, Mr. Modi's Finance Minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, said about India's infrastructure development plan. The approach is powered by 7 engines: railways, roads, airports, mass transportation, ports, waterways, and logistics infrastructure. All 7 engines will propel the economy forward in unison. However, the initiative is less compassionate on rural employment programs. It doesn't include something economists have long advocated for: an urban employment plan to assist daily wage laborers in the country's major cities. In addition, economic reports are apprehensive about the slow rate of job establishment, as millions of people remain unemployed or have given up looking entirely. Prior to the pandemic, India was lifting millions out of poverty. But according to Mahesh Vyas, CEO of the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, it took decades for the country to develop an economic system large enough to recruit more than 400 million people. He claims that the country now has an extra 187 million people looking for work, which is a tall order under the current circumstances. The deep wounds in the economy are most visible in employment and job statistics. According to the center, only 38% of the country's working-age population will be employed in 2020. According to the report, by June 2021, the figure would have dropped to 34.6%. The desperation has spilled onto the street corners just as Mr. Modi and his party face a critical test in state elections that come up weeks later. According to the panelists, the good news is that foreign investors are drawn to butterflies or cash flow generating assets such as existing airports to operate and use as a buffer to invest in greenfield projects. They were also optimistic because of improved transparency in project governance, auction systems for allocating licenses and permits for public resources, the existence of a top tier of well-managed private companies, and other market mechanisms such as the creation of infrastructure funding platforms. Some argue that the requirements for clearances from multiple agencies contribute significantly to India's infrastructure problems. And if you think about it, that seems like a logical opinion. The majority of infrastructure projects in India are behind schedule. This is primarily due to an insufficient regulatory framework and an inefficient approval process. Taking multiple clearances at various government agencies is required for infrastructure projects. At each stage, numerous approvals are necessary, which significantly delays infrastructure projects. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, TechnoGlobal Innovation. Let's get back to the video. What does the future hold for India's infrastructure investment? The infrastructure roadmap for India is exciting and inventive, and it's not an overestimation to say that the new decade appears promising. According to the Indian construction sector in India industry report, India intends to spend US $1.5 trillion on infrastructure between 2019 and 2023 in order to promote long-term development in the country. This depicts the rising upward trajectory of the Indian infrastructure space. Furthermore, with the removal of the COVID-19 restrictions, new infrastructure has advanced, and the Indian national major roads are constantly being upgraded based on the most recent technology. And even more green and spotless initiatives are being implemented by government bodies in major countries. In particular, the Indian government has provided the infrastructure sector with a much-needed boost in the recent 2021 budget. According to Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, India aims for a $5 trillion economy during a budget announcement. The economy can only grow if infrastructure development is prioritized. Furthermore, there's a need to work toward incorporating innovative infrastructure that will provide impetus to PE/VC investments in India. FDIs in the construction development and construction sectors total US dollars 27.78 billion and 17.22 billion respectively between April 2000 and September 2020, according to the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, DPI. To top all that off, the logistics support sector in India is growing at a CAGR of 10.5% per year, indicating that the infra game is thriving in terms of both investments and revenue. Going local is more than just a buzzword. It can help us keep funding within the structure and channel their revenues in a way that allows them to bring in more key players. The private sector will also play an essential role in this regard. This is the time to welcome private winners to take the lead and reboot the infrastructural sectors from an utterly self-sustaining standpoint. This will not only strengthen the infrastructure, but also assist consumers in overcoming their consumption inhibitions. The Atal Tunnel on the Manali-Rohtang Highway, the world's longest tunnel at the highest altitude, is one significant infrastructure endeavor that has had a profound influence and left a transitional mark on the country's infrastructure industry. Such border roads organization achievements have elevated Indian infrastructure technology to a global level. Furthermore, the unprecedented speed in which interconnected highways are being built in Haridwar for the Mahakumbh is commendable. When we think of infrastructure, two key sectors are highways and public services. Likewise, when it comes to energy sources, India is looking to hydrogen like many other countries. While consumers are outraged about increasing oil prices, as a country, we must consider future demands and sources that do not exploit Mother Nature. India is currently at a crossroads where massive investment in R&D for energy efficient and green fuel is desperately needed. As a result, the overall infrastructure is improved. This is a critical decade for India, and it must not lose hope because challenges are an inevitable part of any reformation process. However, they're not on the verge of it, but are taking baby steps. If you like this video about why India's $1.5 trillion infrastructure problem is in need for urgent fixing, then make sure to watch any of the videos on our YouTube channel, TechnoGlobal Innovations.